Hi, this is Billy Tarasio from Modern Law Practice, and I am here with Chad Burton.
Hello.
How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Fantastic. Today we're going to talk about something that I think a lot of law firms struggle with, and that is determining lawyer capacity. How many cases should you have? And if it's not about cases, because we know cases can be all sorts of different sizes,
Right.
then what about how do we determine when we need to hire, who we need to hire, and how to avoid those weeks where lawyers have more work to do than they can possibly do while you have other people in your law firm with available capacity. So this is absolutely something that I have struggled with in my firm, and I would love to get your thoughts.
Um, yeah, it's one of those where it's definitely not a one size fits all type of formula. And it is a situation where even stepping back, and capacity matters for purposes of planning your revenue goals or individual goals, from the standpoint of expectations, because capacity means different things for different people. Some lawyers are very happy working themselves to death as the business owner because they know that the more money they generate, they directly can take it home, especially in smaller firms where maybe they're a sole owner, or they have a smaller staff. But then they struggle with the idea of growing because it's hard to hand off that work. And then once you hand it off, so yeah, it's a big issue that everyone has, and it just depends on the particular situation. So let's maybe be more specific. So you said you've struggled with it. Do you have, like, can we be more specific? Where, like,
Yeah.
what are your challenges that you see?
Well, so in the past, we had a fairly stable average client spend, and I knew just based on the data that my firm needed about 5 new clients per lawyer to be full. And that was based on how long it usually took us to process cases, the types of cases we had, and that was great data. And the way that I got that data was by figuring out the average client spend and um, and then figuring out how many hours, you know, how many hours did it take my lawyers to meet their billable targets. So in my
Right.
firm, the billable target for everybody is essentially 90 collected hours per month, which is totally doable. And that worked. But then we started to change our target client. We started to change our average client spend. We started to change the way that we were lawyering on cases. And then everything got a little bit out of whack.
Yep. And it also depends on how you're dividing labor, right? Like, lawyers and paralegals doing work, because part of those numbers are figuring out, like, how much work should a paralegal be doing. Are you doing the 90 collected hours for paralegals as well?
Yeah, that's the goal across the board.
Yep. And so the other part of it, when you're thinking about hiring and that capacity piece, and you had the five, back when it was working, when you had, then 5 new cases, that was dictating hiring lawyers. Did that also change, that also control, like, how you hired paralegals?
What I think when we first had that goal, our model was one paralegal for 2 attorneys. Now,
Right.
in 2020, we moved to one lawyer to one paralegal. And we didn't do that all at once because at this point, we're up to 7 lawyers. So it's not like we immediately made that decision and switched for everyone, but we tried it for one and it worked so well. People liked it so much that at this point, every lawyer has their own paralegal. But that has not decreased their ability to to hit their targets of 90 collected hours.
Yep. So another thing that kind of plays into this, as we kind of put all these pieces out here and then tie it together, there's an underlying issue, which is the non, from a numerical perspective of putting a revenue number on it. But a lot of this has to do with, like, a delegation piece, because I know a lot of firms with lawyers that, the higher level lawyers are super busy and way beyond capacity than they want, but then they have associates or of counsel that they're failing to hand off work because they, it's the classic delegation type issues where they know they'll do it better and want to make sure that work is getting done. So that underlies all of this is the delegation issue of letting things go, especially as you bring new people on. It's hard to get people up to capacity until they, they're functioning the way that you want them to function. So
Well,
I think
and it's impossible to make time for training when you're slammed.
correct.
So having enough time to train people, um, to make sure that they're competent to test that work, to have quality control, is just absolutely essential, when figuring out that capacity element. One of the things that we're doing and that we're talked about is calendar management. Can we manage our calendars better in order to block out the time we need for the cases we have? And will that give us better insight into capacity?
So you mean like, so for example, on Friday morning, you're working on the Jones versus Smith case for 2 hours or whatever that is. Is that how are you being that compartmentalized?
Yes. So, for instance, if there's a trial date set, I know I want, a 3 hour prep session at this time.
Right.
I know I want a meeting before the pretrial and the exhibits are due. And so, if we work backwards on all of our cases and block off the time that we want to have spent on each case on the attorney's calendar or the paralegal's calendar, then can we use that in order to determine actual capacity and availability?
Maybe. I mean, that require that for it to actually be helpful, it would require that calendar information accurately reflects what really happened. Um, so 3 hours for prepping for a hearing, but maybe they actually spent 8 hours because they're up all night, but the calendar appointment still says 3 hours because nobody's going to pay attention to that calendar appointment. Once it moves on, you do the hearing and then you move on to the next case. Or you just don't do it and somebody basically half-asses the prep and maybe you think it should take 4 hours but they spend an hour, so it has to be accurate and you'd have to change it up. You'd actually have to adjust the appointments after the fact to be accurate, to be able to use that as a data tracking tool.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a minimum, right? It would be the minimum amount of time set aside. Because one of the things that we really hate is working under the gun or working under deadlines or right up to the last minute because we really want to be managing our cases proactively. So in this quest to become this, smooth machine that gives everyone a nice work-life balance and stays full at the same time and never misses any deadlines, there's some growing pains and there's some challenges there.
Right. The productivity unicorn that's out there.
That's the goal.
Right.
Now,
So
with
I
that
mean,
being said, like the latest Clio Trends report came out today, and I've been tracking that for the last 5 years. And of course, it went over, what is it that makes the firms that do the best? What is it that dictates law firm success? And it really can be, it is as simple as utilization and productivity. Law firms
right.
that are productive and that utilize, um, the right amount of hours grow, and law firms that don't. And it doesn't have to be 80% utilization. I think the difference between the firms that were growing and the firms that were shrinking or the firms that were stagnant was like, I think, a 16% difference in utilization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, which makes sense because I mean that's been going on. I mean, what was it? They came out with 2.4 hours of actual billed and collected time per week that lawyers were producing.
I think the collected part was like 1.6. So
1.6. So
2.4 was what they billed, 1.6 was what they realized.
right, right. So like that was the big number from what 3 or 4 years ago, and it's the
Yeah.
same issue. I mean, it's all like, I mean, it all comes. I mean, it's all about having the right people doing the right stuff and have the right processes and procedures in place to be that well-oiled seeking unicorn machine. So you set your goals, like you said, you know what the goals for each individual are in the firm overall. You can, you're an hourly firm. We can get into the issue for hourly versus fixed fee and subscription and all that kind of, because that's a different issue when we get into this topic, which we should hit on in a minute. But you set the goals. You have your team working the cases like you expect them to work. You said you've changed the way you work cases, meaning that you're pushing them harder, you're working them harder. What does that exactly mean when you said you've changed the way
Well,
you handle cases?
I mean, I think that there's probably, if you're a growing law firm like Modern Law has been for the last 10 years, then the types of cases that we were getting 10 years ago and 7 years ago and 6 years ago and 5 years ago and 4 years ago aren't the same as they are now. So as
Right.
our reputation improves and our experience improves, as we get better and better lawyers, higher and higher quality cases, it means that those cases require a different level of lawyering.
Right.
So it's just every, you think you've got it figured out, right? You get to a place where you're pretty stable, but even then, you're never really stable.
Well, it depends. Well, but what you're creating is like a lack of stability is not that's you could have hit like two or three spots. Like if I think about your firm over the past few years, there's probably two or three spots where you could have just stayed where you were and function like you were, and you would grow and incrementally, and you'd be fine. But you have goals, and you want to grow in a way that pushes limits. So
Mm-hmm.
once you start doing that, and you make hiring choices, you've added lots of team members during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
You know when you do those things, it's going to have that feel of the lack of stability. But really, what it is, you're just moving to the next level of what it means to grow, and it feels different.
Mm-hmm.
And but the same structure that you have in place now, if we keep going with your firm, like it works. The numbers change. As you've got, if you focus it around billable hours, that's fine. But your revenue goals will change because rates will be raised, and if you have cases that are higher value cases, then your revenue goals can change, and that's okay. Um, but you're still like, as long as you have the overall firm and individual goals in place, that's a good structure to, and because you also have processes and procedures in place, and your people know what those are supposed to be, and as long as they're following those, now you have a good formula. Are they going to keep changing? Of course they are, because you don't not change. Yeah. And so it depends on what type of firm you want to be. There are lots of firms out there that are happy to be steady and grow a little bit if possible. um,
Don't you think
so
those firms also deal with overwhelm? Because that's what I'm talking about, is those months when there's so much going on. A lawyer's left, or for whatever reason, there's just overwhelm. There's capacity. People are over their capacity. And that's when the wheels seem to fall off. And how do we divide up work when that happens?
short of, I think, extraordinary circumstances, I think most firms in the smaller capacity or smaller size always feel like they're on the edge, especially those that are trying hard. Now there's a different issue if people are being lazy and they know it and they're not doing what they know they're supposed to do. But most firms are constantly in that feeling because they want to move to the next step, whatever that means. And so I think that feeling's always there. It's when you have a big change, like a significant team member leave or something like that, that really kind of throws things. But most people are constantly in that, and it's been constant like that. I mean, if we want to go, as we're watching some of the Clio stuff this morning, obviously it focused a lot around the pandemic timing and stuff. And I forget what new phrase Jack came up with, not new normal, but something else normal. He had some new phrase for it, but the it, it's just been more steady, even over the past year, about the constant, almost franticness of like, what's next, what's happening next. You
Mm-hmm.
have a team member who is like sucking the energy out of you, and you don't want to let them go because it's a pandemic, but you know that it's for the best interest of the business, and you're losing money on them, or so all those are out there. I think the key is being able to move aside the bigger issues and just stay on the path that you have, that you know works for you. And getting those, if you have those goals set, keep that going and just be ready to adjust as you need to, which is the name of it, because people bail on their plans real easily. You know, the firms we work with, very few of them did, mostly because we wouldn't really let them. But at the same time, like it wasn't in their mindset to say, let's just give up and quit or time to do something different. They were constantly thinking about, okay, let's just make sure we're planning ahead. Do we need new marketing efforts? Do we need to think about adding this person over here? Because while I may have been able to bill 150 hours a month before as a law firm owner, because I knew that's part of it, I'm also dealing with the stress of my children at home now, and I can't do what I used to do. So yeah, I'm going to have to let go and hire somebody. So that's just been constant. And so it's sticking with, every successful firms have a structure that works for them, and sticking with that structure and continuing the plan keeps people on the right track. Now, one thing I want to come back to, we're talking about billable hours and goals there. Um, Oftentimes when we're talking about productivity, if productivity is the name of the game on this issue, um, fixed fees. So this is interesting where Jack, talked a little bit, and I only caught part of this about like, is it a client-centered firm if you're a billable hour firm? That's a fun topic that we could spend another video on. But where people are doing fixed fees and subscription models, a lot of people implement those without actual data surrounding what they're charging. And to some extent, that's okay early on because you don't know and you need to experiment, but you have to find a way to make sure that you have data behind over time. And so the simple way for that on when we're talking about productivity is, and what's left is actually tracking your time to understand what it is that you are, how much time you're spending on a case. So for example, you're saying we have a hearing coming up and we're going to set aside 3 hours to prep for it. We know the hearing is going to be 3 hours and here's all the time surrounding it. Let's say you put a fixed cost on that hearing. If you're spending 12, 15 hours on a hearing, but you're charging them the equivalent of like 5 billable hours, that's not, that maybe feel client-centered because the client's getting a hell of a deal, but you're not making money at that point. And so your productivity is way off because you're spending way too much time on a task and you're not making money on it. So that's a different level when you're a non-hourly firm to try to tackle. Very doable, but you just have to spend time on it and figure it out.
Yeah, and that's it's really an interesting point. I think it is harder to figure out a flat fee model than a billable hour model. When
Yep.
when we moved from being hourly to flat fee, it was years and years ago, but it was early on, and we went into the flat fees using data. We figured out exactly how much time we had spent on what we were doing hourly. We added, I think, 30%, and that's how we set our fees. But what immediately happened was we got more complicated cases, and we started doing a lot more work. And then when we did the retrospect of analyzing the fee to the hours, it wasn't even close. We were getting killed. And
Right.
moving back to the hourly model, which we did, it was maybe a year and a half experiment of flat fees. And we tried raising them. It just did not work. And I don't know if that's because we were a relatively young firm with lots of moving parts. Maybe it is easier if you are a solo attorney or if you have fewer attorneys or if you're a little bit more stable in the way that you practice. But for a young, scaling, growing firm, it just failed.
Right. And that kind of goes back to my comment earlier about how everybody functions different. You're going to function differently than others. And so if you're like you are trying out types of cases, different models as far as the team is concerned, the you know your client base was changing all the time. And it's not unlike small firms that take a lot of different cases in that they don't know what they want, but stuff is coming in and it's money. And but like, oh, let's fix fee that. It'll be better. But you don't have any data behind it, or the data you have isn't accurate for that type of case. Now you're just guessing, and that happens all the time. And uh, it requires you at some point to, if you want to make sure that if you want to grow and you want to make more money on it, you have to step back and figure out the data behind it. Like, how much time are you spending on it? Is it worthwhile? Uh, Depending on the practice area. So, for example, like, you know, family law may be, I know this is oversimplifying it, but maybe it's a 50-50 lift on lawyering and paralegal-ing. Um, but then there's other practice areas, like, for example, like immigration law, where paralegals can do almost everything. And so if you have a flat fee, you do have a lawyer involved, and you have a lot of paralegal work, and figuring out how to give credit for those revenue goals overall. Now you have to figure out, well, and we've done this where, firms have been fixed fee for years, and then you require the team members for a period of time to start tracking their time, and you get maybe 6 months of data. Now we can say, oh, on these 5 cases, it's 50-50 paralegal and lawyer. On this set of cases, it's 75 paralegal, 25 lawyer. And then you can actually look at your average client spend on cases. You can look at how how productive the individuals are on the individual cases, like, because it may be that paralegals are spinning their wheels, or the lawyers are spinning their wheels on a case that's unnecessary, but we don't know that until we track time. It's just a different challenge on it. You can get there. You just have to, if you want it to be useful, you just have to spend the time on it to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about one more thing, since we're doing a rambling video without any specific point, and we're covering lots of
rambling. Is this really rambling?
When compared to my normal videos, which are
I'm
different.
not on your normal videos, so we're just having a discussion.
So I just monologue about a very specific topic, but I want to talk about something that I think is
your soliloquies.
Crucially important and very interesting. So I have revenue goals for my attorneys and my paralegals. Many firms have revenue goals for their attorneys and their paralegals, but getting lawyers to actually hit that revenue goal is hard. And then what happens when they don't?
Right.
So lots and lots of small firm owners are out there, and they've got these revenue goals, and their lawyers aren't close to hitting them. And they try incentivizing them, and they try giving them extra money, and they try talking to them. But there's very rarely any actual consequences for failing to hit your numbers. And I can tell you, I don't have consequences for people failing to hit their numbers. The only consequence that I have put into place when people really can't hit their numbers, either they're a bad fit and they have to go, but it's not because of the numbers, or I put them on a percentage where they collect a percentage of what they bring in. But
right.
The thing that I did last quarter that I've never done before, that had pretty big consequences and caused some major emotional events within my law firm, was I added an additional challenge to the group. And the group is now like 15 or 16 people. It's not little. And I said, if every single person on this team meets their billable target, not collected, but billable, if you bill the number of hours you're supposed to bill, every single one of you, then every single one of you gets an extra $1,000. And any ideas on what happened?
How many months have you done it?
1 quarter.
Oh, 1 quarter. I'm guessing that everyone hit it because all of a sudden you have this extra incentive.
Well, yes, everyone hit it, but it was very, very close. And there were about 3 people who were trending behind. And we share these numbers every single week in our company meetings. And what happened in this last month or so, we were way ahead on our revenue goals. We had absolutely met our threshold for the general bonus that everyone was going to get once we hit our revenue target. But this extra $1,000 bonus was a real question mark up until the end. And people started reaching out to those who were behind to say, do you need more work? What do you need? What's going on? And the people who were behind felt an incredible amount of pressure. And at this last retreat we had, they spoke out about that and how bad that made them feel, and how they really wanted everybody to know how bad that made them feel. And then there was a discussion about whether or not we should have this additional bonus. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Probably lots, but yeah, going back to what you're saying up front, a lot of times when there are goals in place, they get excused. And because there's lots of reasons why it could be. And sometimes it can fall back on the firm because marketing efforts aren't working and there's not enough, if you have a firm where the lawyers are not expected, or like if you don't have business development on the individuals, and the firm's not producing the revenue, well, then that's an excuse. And that's happened a lot this year because, pandemic and the world burns down. And it's like, things aren't the same. So we'll let people off the hook. And
But I don't know how real that is, because I know that my team has had more than enough work to do that they could have been doing for years. And it's still maybe 50-50 of people that actually hit their goal. People usually get real close. And so what am I going to do? Nothing. But it wasn't until, like, what I explained to the team was, like, you've always been accountable to the organization for your billable target. Like, of course we have billable targets. That's how law firms work. But you've never been accountable to each other up until now. And when you were accountable to each other, that's when you all performed. So it felt like a little bit of a mean experiment.
well, but even before they're still accountable to each other, it just didn't have an individual feel. Because if you share numbers, so if somebody's way behind and not pulling their weight, even though you don't have that individual requirement, people are going to look at somebody and know that they're the reason. If you fall 50 hours short and somebody's 60 hours behind, look who's going to get blamed on this is that individual. It's a little different though, because
This was going to be $1,000 in their pocket.
right.
They were not going to get if so and so didn't pull their weight.
Right. Yeah, but it's just more targeted on it. I'd still say there's individual accountability, but here it's what you're asking, which is kind of fun. You're asking people to do what they've agreed they would do.
Yes.
Because they have work.
Right.
You're saying I've always had it. So we're discounting the concept that there wasn't enough work in the firm. They have it.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knows they have it. So what you're asking people to do is to do their job. Mm-hmm. And that's very easy for us to get our head around and say, well, that's it. I pay them. They need to just do what they're supposed to do. But we know that's not how humans work. Mm-hmm. And that, that extra incentive drives people. So what was the resolution on the, people that were hurt over this?
Here's what we decided, that we were going to keep the incentive in place, at least for one more quarter, with the understanding that it's not appropriate for you to run everybody else's numbers and go talk to them about their performance. But we also created a new Slack channel that is for two things. A Slack channel for people who need help, because one of the things we talked about is how do we ask for help? And we came up with an agreement on how we would ask for help. You ask for help by saying, I need X specifically by Y date on this case. Who can help me? And so we have a Slack channel that is help me. Who can help me? And then it's also on the person who is having trouble meeting their goal, meeting their time, to reach out for help, in which case other people will give them more work or help them with time tracking or whatever. But we're going to try it that way. The other thing I'm thinking I want to do, because I never ever want to penalize somebody for like life happens. So I think I might make it like 90%. Like if 90% of people hit their target, I feel like that's a win. I never want somebody to be sick and in the hospital and unable to meet their target and feel like they've let everybody down. Like that's not the point. So that's kind of what I'm thinking.
What's the 90%? 90% of people?
90% of people. So if there's 16 of us or whatever, as long as 14 out of 16 people hit that target, everybody can still bonus.
Okay.
What do you think?
But well, I think, well, if we're going to do that, now we have to start thinking about for the two people that didn't, then is there a category of exemptions? Like they were sick, they had a significant other that was sick.
No,
Uh,
it's just a pass. It's some people get a pass each time. I don't
some,
know.
but right, but then some people. So then now you're gonna have this interesting resentment if the same two people always are the two that aren't hitting it. Um, yeah,
The,
I mean
the
the
most
other part that
interesting thing about running a law firm is you've got like all it is a series of experiments. It's we're experimenting with our clients, we're experimenting with the people that work for us, we're experimenting with numbers and with pricing models, and all we're doing is watching, tweaking metrics and seeing what the outcomes are. And sometimes the outcomes are multifaceted, like they're not simple.
right. Oh, absolutely. And the other thing, when you first talked about this, this goal last time, and because you had some other things that were going on where, like, you needed, for example, for people to like close out cases because you were trying to assess caseload, and there are some people that have been so busy that it looks like they have this massive list of cases, but their real active cases are maybe normal to high, but it's twice as many as it should be. And um, one of the things I like with this concept of when you're adding extra incentives, you from a law firm owner, you can start saying, and this could change from quarter to quarter based on what you need to say, hey, as a group, we're lagging behind on this target. Let's say the closed cases. If people don't close cases out in line with our processes and procedures, that could jeopardize that bonus as well. And so it may not always be just about revenue goals on it. It could be other things as well to fix, because what we're talking about is changing behavior of people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
In one fashion. So we have, and you want a little hunger, like a sad law firm Hunger Games version of people like reaching out and blaming each other, and maybe not quite as cool as that. But this is, you're at, I mean, what you did was said, look, if you do what you've agreed to do, I'm going to give you more money. If everybody does what they agreed to do, I give you more money. Awesome. I think you have, the option from, as you add those incentives to, use it to change behavior on other things. So for example, if
It's
you
really interesting, like, because what did not change behavior was the addition of money. Let's be really clear here. For some people, the extra $1,000 might have been enough, but that really wasn't the thing that changed the behavior. The things that changed the behavior was the idea that you were part of the team, and if you didn't hit your goal, that the team would suffer. So it would not have worked as an individual goal.
right, but it was, though, in the sense that if you didn't do it, it was the money that triggered this, because the people reached out. It wasn't like a feel good, like, I hope we, beat it as a team. They wanted the money. That's why they're reaching out to people to
Oh,
say, do you want
okay.
help?
So some people were motivated by money, and
Right.
other people were motivated by peer pressure.
Right, because
And
maybe they didn't want, like, the money maybe is not as important to them, but it was the money that triggered all of this, because that triggered the peer pressure. So it was the money that changed the behavior and started to alter the issues.
and
And
one of the things that law firm owners have to decide is like, will this benefit my culture or hurt my culture? And that was the discussion we were having about this particular incentive. Nobody minded being incentivized to meet their goals. Nobody minds the fact that they have goals. What they really minded was their peers treating them in a way they didn't like. And they wanted to make sure that we didn't have a system at modern law that made modern law weaker. So it was a really good discussion. I appreciated their vulnerability, and we're going to try it for another 3 months, and then we'll see how it goes.
right. to see if Katniss survives or not. But
So I feel like that's enough for today. You're going to have to help me write this up so we can figure out what topics we covered and maybe at different points in time so that people don't have to watch all of it if they don't want to. But I feel like it's been a good discussion and I'm glad you could join me today for our video.
yeah, it was fun.
We'll
We'll
see
do
you
it
later. Bye.
again.